stop right there. Before you even think about speccing into this build, I'm going to share with you all of the tips and tricks that I did so that you can avoid dying constantly. This build is very, very particular in how you set it up, and you can die with one misclick of a button, and not from monsters, just from yourself. I'm going to show you a full run of a tier 15 map. After that, we're going to get into the build so you can see exactly how to set it up. I'll share with you all of the little details that you're going to need to know, down to the very specific stats that you're going to have to meet in order to get this build to run properly. It took me days to get it set up, so don't let that be you. Take a look at the run, and then let's hop into it.
Feast on flesh! Vile flower! on flesh.
As you can see, the damage is insane. But like I said, there is a very, very, very high chance that you can kill yourself. With the way that the demon form works, you are constantly taking damage from yourself. So we are fighting that using the flasks. Now, in order to get this to work We're going to go over the gear first. It requires some very specific stats. It's going to be listed in the planner that's going to be in the description of this video. So make sure you checked out that planner. I have it all listed out for you. I'll have it up here on the screen, but instead of having to pause the video constantly, just make sure that we go through and you follow along with that planner. In order for this build to work properly, you need 8 ascendancy points. I tried running it with 6. It was doable, but it was much more squishy than it is right now. Now, as you can see, my resistances are a little bit low. I am taking 20% less damage from lightning and from cold, but I still need to make sure that this is a little bit higher. So this will result in a little bit less deaths. But as you saw, we kind of just flew through everything anyway. But make sure as you're building your gear, you work on your resistances a little bit more than I have. I'm still working on replacing my gear and getting this build set up. So that will help with your survivability a lot. For the gear, a couple really key things that you're going to need. You're going to need a lot of dexterity. So we have to have at least 133. And then for the intellect, you have to have at least 191. Those are going to be the stats that you're going to need in order to get your skill gems to work. So with that being said, you have to make sure that when you look at building your gear, you have to put enough intellect and enough dexterity on there to make it work. Level 80 is the minimum that you can get this build started because you need that many points. The ring itself here, all you need to do is make sure that you get your stats, so either intellect or dexterity. You're going to want to run fire resistance because you need to max that out. We actually don't want to be running much max life or max mana with this build. You want to be running as much maximum energy shield as you can. And what the beauty of this is, you can put rarity gear on pretty much every piece that is not unique because you don't need all of the extra stats. Because this is going to be focused around cold damage, getting cold damage on your ring here is actually a really great option for you. So you can do a little bit of extra damage as if it doesn't do enough damage already, but this is going to be a good option for you. For the helmet here, this is where we put some more intelligence, and this is where we put some more fire resistance. We went as heavy into energy shield as we can. So whatever you can stack as energy shield, make sure you're stacking it. For the amulet, this is where we get very specific. You need a minimum of 35 spirit on the amulet. I went ahead and I got as much spirit as I possibly could. If you can get 50 and 15, this will allow you to have an additional spirit gem running. So if you can find an amulet that has 15 spirit, 50 spirit, because it has to be exact there or you will be short. And you need to have damage recouped as in life. And it has to be those exact stats, or else you will run short on spirit. But if you don't do that, it is absolutely runnable with only 35 spirit. You do need to have a minimum of 20% of damage taken is recouped as life. That is going to be your lifeblood for keeping you alive while the demon form is doing damage to yourself. So that is a key stat for this amulet. Having your all attributes here is also going to give you points towards your dexterity and your intellect goal. For the boots, if you can get 35% movement speed, absolutely do it, but make sure that you get movement speed, fire resistance, and the life regeneration actually does not hurt at all. I would highly suggest going with that if you can get it. That's going to make sure that you're regenning as well as recouping life from the damage with your amulet. For the belt, this is also pretty specific. The flasks gain 0.17 charges per second. You want to get that. You want to be constantly regenning your flask. This runs very heavily into your flask generation. We get our fire resistance here, and then you also need a minimum of 35% increased flask rate recovery. Where you can see that, if you scroll down a little bit, you can go right down to your flasks. You want to be running at least 75% of your life recovery rate modifier. Not the increase amount, but it has to be the life recovery rate modifier. As long as you hit that goal, that will allow you to make sure that your flask is regenerating fast enough to keep up with the damage that's being done. The two uniques that you're going to need to run for this build, you're going to need to run Ming's Heart. This is going to reduce the global defenses of everything that you have on you. So all your evasion, your energy shield, and your armor. It's also going to reduce your maximum life. We do more damage to ourselves based on the amount of maximum life that we have. And in order for this build to run properly, you have to be able to take a little bit of damage. This will allow us to still take a little bit of damage, but that damage amount will be a little bit less than what it would be because we're losing the maximum life. We're also going to be running Ghost Writhe. This is going to take 50% of your maximum life converted to energy shield. When I was looking for this, I wanted at least 50% maximum life. You can change it up a little bit depending on how much you wanted to spend. And then also you wanted to get at least 30% chaos resistance. The more, the better, because this is actually something I'm going to be working on. I want to get this capped out. And the last thing that I haven't ever really had to cover in a build is going to be your life flask. This is going to be really important. Find an ultimate life flask, and it has to be a sapping. It's going to remove 15% of life is going to be recovered as mana. So it's going to take your mana and it's going to give you more life when you use this. You will be spamming your potions. They will always be on cooldown and in queue waiting to be used. It's going to be 100% of the time. You want to have at least 95% increased life recovery here instead of the increased charges gained here. If you can get something that gives you charges per second, that's going to be the best flask that you can get. This way you're passively recovering all of your charges and you don't have to worry about finding a back of monsters in order to get back your charges. So those are the stats for the gear. Now make sure while you're doing this, you put together those specific stats. If you forget which ones they are, you don't want to go back in the video, refer to the planner because that will have all of them listed out for you. We're going to go over the skills. Now the skills are also very, very specific. I had everything set up what I thought was correct, but I couldn't get it to work properly. It's because the skills weren't set up to the right level of gem. They have to be at the correct level in order for this to work properly. Obviously, we're going to be taking demon form. That's going to be taken from your ascendancy points. We'll get to that when we get into the passive tree. Inside of demon form, we're going to be running second wind. This makes it cool down a little bit slower, but we get 2 charges now. This way, if you have to hop out of demon form, because sometimes it happens, you have to backtrack really, really far, you're not stuck waiting for that cooldown to come back up. You have an additional charge. We're also going to be running ingenuity. Supported skills have a 30% increased cooldown recovery rate. So we're going to be increasing the cooldown rate here, but we're going to be decreasing the cooldown rate here. So we're kind of counteracting it a little bit. It's still going to end up a little bit more than it normally would, but this is going to be a saving grace for you. For barrier invocation, this right here is going to be your main source of damage. You do not have to have a 5 link to make this work. Just having a 4 link is going to be sufficient enough. The 5 link just gives you a big boost in damage. When you're running, you don't actually have to do that. I was lucky enough to find a perfect jeweler drop and I threw it right in here. So in order to get this to run properly, this has to be a level 19 gem. Has to be. There's no way around it because it doesn't function properly without having enough energy gained. What this is going to do, while active, this invocation gains energy when your energy shield is damaged by a hits. So when we take damage, it's going to fill up barrier invocation and give it energy. Using the invocation, once sufficient energy is gathered, will consume the energy to trigger the socketed spell. And you can trigger them multiple times if you have enough energy. So how this works, we actually are going to socket a skill gem into this spirit gem. And we'll show that in just a second. While you're using this, whenever you take damage, which is why we actually are doing damage to ourselves, that damage is giving barrier invocation energy. When we hit a certain amount of energy, that we can cast barrier invocation, and that is going to automatically cast comet for us. That's the big source of damage. Inside of this, we're going to be running a capacitor. This is going to give supported meta gems, which is what barrier invocation is, 80% increased maximum energy. This has to be socketed right after barrier invocation. So right here, this has to be the next one that you put in. Then this is where we put in comet. Comet is a skill gem, but you can put your skill gems in right here. That is going to be your main source of damage. Every time that we generate enough energy for barrier invocation to be cast, it's going to automatically cast comet. To modify comet, we're going to be doing considered casting. Supported skills have 15% less cast speed, but the supported skills are going to deal 40% more spell on hit. It is going to be a huge boost of damage. Then we're going to be running spell cascade. Supported skills that affect an area around you or a target location, causing spells to also target additional areas on either side of the targeted area. What that means is that when you put your cursor or your controller in a direction and you cast this, it's going to cast additional ones on each side of wherever that should be casting. So you're going to cast additional ones at the same time. Supported skills from Cascade also have 20% less area of effect. Supported skills deal 30% less damage, and supported skills and also affected areas on either side of the targeted area are random. So it's going to do a little bit less damage using this, but we're going to have 3 of them come out instead of just 1. So we make up the damage lost by a lot here, especially with running considered casting where we're already gaining 40% more. Then we're going to be running spell echo. Supported skills are going to have 30% less cast speed, but echo from supported skills have a 30% more area of effect. The supported skills can echo once. When we cast it, it echoes the comet, which means that it casts double. So now we're casting double and triple because of a spell cascade. So now we are casting 6 of them at one time, which is why the screen fills with all of the comets. It's pretty crazy to see. Then we're going to be running Alchemist Boon. Now remember, this is going to be a flask-driven build. So this is going to give 28% recovery from your flasks. Is also granted to allies in your presence. You're going to be granted 0.25 flask charges per second. We're stacking as many flask charges per second as we possibly can. Inside of that, we're going to be running Herbalism. 30% increased recovery from flasks while a supported skill is active. So this is active right now. In order to activate these, you just right click and make sure that there's a little spinny thing around it. That is going to be them active. We're also going to be running Arctic Armor. Conjures an ice barrier that gains stages over time. While the barrier has stages, melee attacks that hit you will remove the stages, causing a burst of ice that deals cold damage to the attackers. So this is just a little bit of extra damage, just in case you get attacked. There are other options if you wanted to run them and mess around with the build a little bit, because you will have 30 spirit. So if you find something that works really, really well for this build, let me know in the comments, post what you changed, because Arctic Armor definitely could be replaced if you wanted to. So let me know what it is. Next, we're going to be running Hypothermia. This is going to be a curse. It's going to curse all targets in the area, and it's going to lower cold resistances. What we actually use this for is to get the build started. When you first zone in, you can't cast Barrier Invocation, but when you cast Hypothermia, it's going to slowly build up your Infernal Flame. When it gets to max, it actually does damage to you. That damage is enough to get the Barrier Invocation started. So that's why we're going to be running Hypothermia here. Inside of this, we're going to be running Heightened Curse. Increase the affected area of the curse. So we can actually use this when we get to bosses. Other than a boss, you really won't need it, but honestly, the bosses die so fast that you don't really need this at all. But this is going to give you just a bigger radius on your curse if you do want to use it. Then we're going to be running Mobility. 30% less movement speed penalty while you're casting the supported skill. So this way, if you do need to cast this, you won't slow down quite as much, because it is pretty slow cast time. Then the last thing we're going to be running is going to be Grim Feast. This is just going to be a little bit of extra survivability. Whenever you kill a monster, it has a chance to spawn this little ghost looking thing. When you run over it, it's going to recharge your energy shield. This is just a little bit of extra energy shield back while you're killing monsters and you're moving through, in case you forget to use your potions, or in case you stand on something that is not good to stand on. So with the skill gems, what is super important, for your barrier invocation, this has to be a level 19. We talked about that before. For your comet, this also has to be a level 19. If they are not level 19, this does not work. I tried it. If they're not level 19, you won't generate enough energy in order to continually cast barrier invocation. So having these at max is going to be super important to this. That means you're going to need a level 19 spirit gem and a level 19 skill gem before you even get this started. Depending on how your gear is set up, if you wanted to level up Alchemist Boon, you can. Just know, the higher levels you go, the more dexterity you need. So right now, I'm running pretty much capped with how much dexterity and how much intellect my character can run. But if you find some better gear and you put the right stats on and you wanted to level that up, you absolutely can. So that's just going to be an option for you. So that's the skills. Let's take a look at the passive tree. So for the passive tree, starting with your ascendancies, you absolutely should go get your 8 ascendancies first before you swap to this build, because it took me a little while to learn. When I first swapped, I didn't do it, and then I got stuck. So I had to learn how to work the build around it. It didn't work properly, but I got it to work a little bit, but it was a little rough until I got all 8 ascendancy points. This build is not a starter build. This build is not a build that you can just hop right into. You need to be level 80, have all 8 ascendancy points if you can. If you absolutely want to try it with 6 ascendancy points, that is the minimum that you can do. You're going to take out your altered flesh and then your life here. Those are going to be the ones that you can take out if you want to, but it makes you a lot more squishy and means a lot more deaths. For these ascendancy points, we're going to be taking demonic possession. This is going to give you your demon form. What this does, increases cast speed well in demon form. You add 6 levels to all of your spell skills. You're going to lose 0.5 of life per second per demon flame. Now, the demon flames get up pretty high. Sometimes they get up to 150 stacks. So you are going to be losing 75 life per second with that. Then we're also going to deal 17% increased spell damage per demon flame. This is where the damage starts to really ramp up. The longer that you're in this form, the more damage you do by a lot. It's not a little bit. So this is going to be your main source of damage here, but it is also your main source of deaths. We're also going to be taking Pyromantic Pact. Your maximum mana is going to be replaced by Infernal Flames. If you look down here, we have Infernal Flames instead of mana. It's also going to gain Infernal Flames instead of spending mana for skill cost. So that's why we have to start with using your Frostbite. When you cast it, you're going to gain Infernal Flames. Once you get your Infernal Flames to max by spending, You're going to take maximum life and energy shield as fire damage when the Infernal Flames reaches maximum. So you spend your Frostbite until your Infernal Flames fill up. When it fills up, you're going to take life and energy shield damage. That's how you can start Barrier Invocation. You lose all of your Infernal Flames upon reaching maximum stacks. So once you reach maximum, you go back to 0. That is why it's really important that Barrier Invocation is level 19, so that you can generate enough Infernal Flames that when you cast Barrier Invocation, it has enough to continuously cast, and it max out Infernal Flame, and then you keep on taking damage. 10% of Infernal Flames are lost per second when you haven't gained any in the past 2 seconds. So your Infernal Flames will just start to go down. But with the way that this build works, if you saw it in there, we are constantly casting. We're also going to be taking Grinning Immolation. Become ignited when you deal a critical strike, taking 15% of your life and energy shield as fire damage per second. You gain 30% more critical strike damage bonus. This is going to be another source of taking damage so that we are continually taking damage to our energy shield. That way we can continuously cast Barrier Invocation. And for the final one, we're going to be taking Altered Flesh. 20% of all damage is going to be converted to either fire or into chaos. Cold and lightning, 20% of that is going to go into fire damage, and then 20% of your physical is going to be converted into chaos damage. That's why making sure that we have enough fire resistance is going to be super important. You still want to get your other resistances up as much as you can, but this is going to be really important for your build. Let's take a look at the rest of the tree. So coming up, we're going to go straight into a lot of maximum energy shield. We're going to be taking pure energy, then we're going to be taking dampening shield, 28% more energy, and then this is going to actually give us some stun threshold. That's really important because we want to make sure that we do not get crowd controlled. We're going to be taking damage from ourselves, so we don't want to get stunned or frozen and then take damage from everybody else as well. But we're also going to take melding. This is going to give us more energy shield and reduce maximum mana. The mana reduction really isn't too important for this build. We're going to be going into Soul Bloom, 15% increased shield recovery rate. Then we're going to come around to here. We're going to be running Heavy Buffer, increased maximum energy shield, reduced maximum life. We want to be reducing our maximum life so that the number that we're taking for our hits is going to be a lot less. And then we're going to be taking Illuminous Crown, 70% increased energy shield from your equipped helmet. So the more energy shield you can stack on that helmet, the more that you're going to be getting. We're also going to be running Hallowed, 20% increased stun recovery rate, and then 20% of your maximum energy shield as additional stun threshold. Inside of this, you have a whole bunch of increased stun threshold. I haven't gotten to max this one out yet, but this is going to be in the planner. We're going to be going into this to make sure that we don't get stunned. Coming up, we're going to be going into Ingenuity. This is going to give us some additional intellect. And then we're also going to be taking Patient Barrier, 60% maximum increased energy, and then a 20% slower recharge rate, but that's okay because we're going to be recharging it ourselves. Coming down, make sure that you don't skip this right here. This is your meta skills, and your meta skill is Barrier Invocation. It's going to gain additional energy. This is going to be where we get our freeze threshold from. Gain 100% of maximum energy as additional freeze threshold. This is going to help keep us from getting frozen. We're going to be taking Dynamism, 40% increased damage if you've triggered a skill recently. Meta skills gain 15% increased energy. Eternal Youth is going to be super important to this build. It's going to take your energy shield and now your life flask recover your energy shield, which is why it's so important that we run the life is recouped from damage, because we're not going to actually be recovering our life with our flask. We're going to be recovering our energy shield. We're going to be going into Savoring. 20% chance flask you use will not consume a charge. Then coming down, we're going to be going into Heartstopper. 50% less damage over time if you started taking damage over time in the past second. Immolation is going to be doing damage to us from our ascendancy points, so we're going to be mitigating 50% of that, and because it's going to be running constantly, we're always going to be taking 50% less damage, which is good because we take a lot of damage. We're going to be going down into Hail Travelers. 20% increased life recovery from flasks. Flasks gain 0.1 charges per second. You need to make sure you are going as heavy into your flask recovery as you possibly can, so we're going to take a lot of it inside of this tree here. We're going to be coming down to Potent Concoction. Flasks applied to you have a 20% increased effect. Eventually, I'll be taking Lasting Concoctions, 25% increased flask effect duration, 25% increased flask charges gained. Then coming down, we're going to be going into Elemental Equilibrium. Hits that deal fire damage remove fire exposure and inflict lightning exposure. Hits that deal cold damage remove cold exposure and inflict fire exposure. Hits that deal lightning damage remove lightning exposure and inflict cold exposure. Inside of this tree, we're actually going to be taking reinvigoration. I just haven't gotten the points yet, so as I level up, we'll be going into this here. Regenerate 1% life per second if you've used a flask within the last 10 seconds. We're also going to be taking Oasis. You cannot use a charm, but you're going to get 30% more recovery from flasks. And then we're also going to be going down into this tree, but we will not be taking either of these here. So that's where you're going to be putting all of your passive points in. Now we'll talk about the jewels, because the jewels are also going to be very specific, and I'll have them written out inside the planner as well. So for this jewel here, you want to be taking damage taken recouped as life. Meta skills gain 6% increased energy. Those are the two stats that are going to be important. You can run up to 15% gained energy for meta skills. That is something that you can do with this gem here if you find one that has those two stats. For the other ones, we're going to be running anything that has increased life recovery from flasks and then increased flask charges gained. You want to be running about 15% if you can find them. Mine is a little bit low, but I'm still able to run the build as it is. So to get you started, you can have at least 11, 12% on there. That's going to be a little bit cheaper if you want to get this build up and running. We're going to also be doing this exact same thing here. Charges gained and then recovery from life. Same thing here. We're going to be running more recovery from flasks and then more charges gained. Another one. So we want to have 4 of them minimum. Now, we don't have less than 11%, but if I had 15%, it just makes the build a lot better. You're going to get more recovery from your flasks. Then we're going to be doing anything that has increased energy here. So your meta skills are going to gain 15% more. And then in the last jewel spot, this is going to give me 2% more maximum fire resistance. Because I'm gaining enough energy, I actually can swap this out for additional fire resistance, which is going to be a huge defensive modifier. There is a unique jewel that you can get. The unique jewel is called Against the Darkness. That jewel has a ton of different modifiers on it, so they're all random. The one that you're going to be looking for is going to be your notable passives are going to increase your maximum fire resistance by 1. What that'll do is it'll take 1, 2, 3 and add additional maximum fire resistance. That'll put you at 80%. You'll feel a lot safer because you won't be taking quite as much fire damage. So if you can get your hands on one, that's going to be the best option for you. That's your passive tree. Let's talk about how to test this build, because I made this mistake early on. You do not actually have to go out into the wild. A lot of you probably know this already, but you don't have to go out and actually fight monsters to test out your build. You can do it right here, right next to your well, so that you can learn how to run the build. The way that you start off the build is you're going to start by going into demon form. When you go into demon form, for me, I'm going to have to cast Frostbite 4 times. On my 4th cast, you're going to see my energy shield drop. When the energy shield drops, then you're going to use a life flask. Then you're going to cast Barrier Invocation once. Your energy shield will drop again. You use another life flask, and you empty your life flask charges. They stack. They sit there waiting to be used after you've used them. You don't have to just click it every time that you see your energy shield move. So when you pop your demon form, you're going to do 1, 2, 3 casts, and then you use your flask, Barrier Invocation, and now we empty our flasks, and then you just click. Do not hold it, because if you hold it, what ends up happening, if you watch the energy shield, it just slowly drops more and more and more, and then what's going to end up happening is that I'm going to come right out of my form, and then I go right down, it takes my life. So you want to make sure that you are not pressing and holding the button down. Click until your gear gets set up correctly, that's when you can hold. But for now, until you get enough life recovery, enough resistances, and enough gear that's going to set this up, you want to make sure that you are using just the click method. So let's go back into demon form. We're going to go back into this. You're going to use your elixir, and then you're going to click. So empty your flask, and then you just click. This is enough right here to keep your energy at max. You can click it relatively quickly, but this is going to make sure that you do not die right away. So if you look what happened if I click it too quickly, my life just goes down really, really fast. So you'll get the timing down for wherever your character is set up at, but this is how the build is going to work. If you watch it and I stay inside of this form long enough, these are my demon flames ticking up. This is going to be the life that I'm losing. Now, if you look right here, my life starts to go down really, really fast. That's where taking damage and having damage recouped as life is going to be really important. If you don't have that damage recouped as life, because you do take quite a bit of damage in this form, your life will go all the way down and then you pop out of demon form. When you pop out of demon form, if you have been casting Barrier Invocation, you may have 0 energy shield, and that means you're dead. So there is a lot of different ways that you can kill yourself with this build. So get into one of these and make sure that you check and test your build inside of a hideout so you do not go out and die and lose all of your experience. That's the build. If you make any changes or you test out the build and you really love it, I would love to hear from you. Hit the comments below. Let me know what you think. I'm live every night. I would love for you to stop by, say hi, do some theory crafting with me. Catch you on the clip side.